answers to your questions from the previous week. What's up, gang? Brian B. at West Coast Swing Online. I've been in front of the camera, behind the camera, changed the batteries, changed the mics. I'm back in front of the camera. So we are going to answer your questions from the previous week. If you have any questions during the video, please type them in either on Facebook and or YouTube, but we've got a bunch that got emailed in all the way up till this evening. But we're going to start with one that came off of our dips and tricks video. I can't remember who asked it, about the ride, the timing of the ride in the whip. Can I steal you, Miss Megan? So the question was the timing of this. We did a dips, tricks, and drops, rides, swings, and we did this kind of whip where we did this little ride out of it. And so the question was the timing of it. So if I looked at this, if we counted the pattern, right, we'd go 1, 2, right? We'd start around for 3, 4, 5. At some point, I'd put her on her foot for 6, and we'd anchor 7 and 8, right? If we did it in only 8 counts. But thinking about West Coast Swing in 2-beat increments, I would have to finish the pattern in a perfect world. In a perfect world, to be on time, I would finish this on a 2, 4, 6, and 8, followed by an anchor step. Now, if I did this musically, which is if I was going to take the trouble of doing this trick and I could learn how to do a ride and I could lead it, my follower could follow it, I would probably be lining that up to a 1 or 5 or an accent in the music. If you don't know much about that, go to West Coast Swing Online. Just Google West Coast Swing Online Musicality. We've got a cool resource page that has a bunch of stuff in musicality. But I'd be accenting the 1, so I might have been doing this. 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I'd be trying to put that on an accent in the music, which would typically be a 1. And how long it lasted would be whatever's happening in the music and whatever's happening within the partnership. We have a Rising Star competition here in Louisville at our event in late January. And the inaugural winner, Stevie Bliss, the winner of that competition gets to teach the workshop on Sunday, and I came down to watch the winner, and she said something that stuck with me since then, 7 years ago. And she said, this pattern is supposed to take 12 beats. However, depending upon who you're dancing with in that moment to that song with that person, it might not take that amount of time, so let it be what it needs to be. Cool. So now Mr. Benjamin, the voice behind the camera, thank you, Miss Megan, will narrate our first question.
Have a couple questions regarding the reopening and the coronavirus. So the first one, as places start to reopen, it seems as if there is a new reality in which returning to the dance floor may not be a possibility. Do you think we will return to a place where social dancing will be normal?
Will we return to a place where social dancing will be normal? Yes, absolutely, for sure. Will it happen quickly? It likely will not. And I'm not an expert, but obviously, like a lot of you guys, have been forced to think about that, maybe even more so than other people, because we're in an industry where we are in close personal contact. So I don't know. I think that the next 3 weeks will tell. Here in Louisville, we will be able to start teaching lessons next week, early next week. I think on the 26th we're beginning. So as people are out and around, I think we'll learn a lot. The activities of that first week probably won't show up for another week or 2 on the news. And so what that will look like, I don't know. And as I thought about this question before I came in today, I've started to form, and I've hesitated from doing this previously, I've started to form a personal opinion, and I have not really shared it before. But I think what's going to happen is the world is going to have to turn back on to a great degree, and it's going to be moderated by our own personal choices in mass. And this came from a friend of mine here in town that has a martial arts studio, which, much like dancing, is super personal contact, actually way more than dancing. We'll leave the dirty details out of that. But and of course, he was shut down like us, and he thought with social distancing, it's impossible. At least dancing, we could do classes from a distance, and there's something we can gain from that, at least in the short term. But in his world of teaching people how to fight and defend themselves and that type of stuff, it's an impossibility. And his argument was that the people who are afraid, the people who are at risk, will probably and should stay home. Of those people that are at risk, one of my best friends is one of them. He doesn't care. So I think it will sort itself out on those lines. And but in time, it will definitely come back. Will it come back quickly? I don't know. but it will come back, and the next several weeks I think will be very telling now that we're kind of off this lockdown. So I have faith. I'm a positive person by nature, so I've taken the downtime as an opportunity to focus on other things that I likely wouldn't have in the hustle and bustle of the normal dance world. Of course, we're all eager to get back, but I think if we stay positive, focus on what we can, and take the positivities from that, and it will come back. It just might not be on our time frame. Boom, heavy stuff out of the way.
The next one, can you give advice to students taking private lessons on how to continue their progress without the ability to see their instructor on a regular basis?
Yeah, so this is definitely, we're fortunate and I've been on both ends of the spectrum as a teacher, where I've been a traveling teacher, and I only saw students maybe a couple times a year, especially overseas. And then of course here in the studio, where we see people several times a week, maybe even sometimes every day. And it's two different worlds. So I think I think it's important to develop a relationship with a teacher, whether you see them regularly or not. And those of us here in this room that are on these videos, we all have coaches, and we do not get the luxury of working with our coaches on a weekly basis. And I think most professional dancers do not have that opportunity. So you can ask yourself, you can say, hey, well, if there's a lot of pros that don't work with their teachers regularly, then maybe it's not a terrible thing. But by developing a relationship with your teacher, understanding and explaining to them where you're going to go, having them guide you with the steps that you need to take to get there, developing some regularity or at least a plan on how often you'll see them. We used to see our coach at least 3 times a year, and we would know what the goal was in between those segments. We would take quite a lot of time, and we would leave with a plan until the next time that we saw the teacher. So I think you can, and I think it's a collaborative effort. If you can work with your teacher, even one-on-one, like especially now that we have everyone's on Zoom and live coaching, I don't necessarily think that that has to be the thing to take private lessons, but even working through the information, maybe even over the phone for a 30-minute chat in between, or an email, or asking some questions would be very helpful to keep your progress going. And I also think with all this going on now, that the online video stuff will be a bigger thing, and people are starting to see the validity in that, and that could be a tool you could use moving forward.
Here at Dance Louisville, will we be doing group lessons with the restriction of bringing your own partner?
Oh, this must be someone from Louisville, one of our students. Who is it?
It's Alfred.
Oh, Alfred. Will we? So, good question. I don't know. We are going to kind of open up. We have like limits of 10 people, and we have a whole set of guidelines from the government, you know, that we kind of have to follow. And they've actually been loosened a little bit and been a little bit more recommendations. And the recommendations say no, you know, limit to groups of 10. So to sort it out, like I said in the previous couple questions ago, we're not sure over the next week or two how things are going to react. I'm sure we have students ready to come back. Maybe not all of them, but some of them are for sure ready to come back. So we're going to take the next week or two to sort things out before we take a stab at a group class. At that point, I think we'll have a little bit better idea of which direction we'll go. Any thoughts on that for you guys? Yeah, so let's say that the governmental restrictions or the good Samaritan thing to do is to limit groups of 10. Awesome, so let's say we got 5 leaders and 5 followers. Now the question becomes, do people bring their own partners or do they mix and match? I think there's gonna be a percentage of people that don't care, and they're gonna mix and match and they just don't care. There's for sure a percentage of people, there's risky people out there. So some of those people are just gonna go for it. So I don't know which tact we're gonna take specifically. I think the way we've always kind of run business is we're here for the customers, so whatever the mass of people wants, we try to serve that, and if we can serve the smaller subsets of groups, we'll do that as well. So if the mass of people say, hey, we don't care, we just want a normal group class and rotate, maybe we'll do that. And then if there's a smaller subset that we can service, that we might create some, you know, bring your partner only type group classes. But the way that I look at it, Emily's shaking her head behind the camera, so that makes me feel good that I'm on the right track. We'll look at what the mass of people want to do, we'll serve them, and then we'll see if there's any significant minorities, and we'll see if we can serve them and create a class or a product that serves them. But we won't know here for a couple of weeks. Yeah? we're good.
Next question, moving off of reopening and on to Waltz. Is there a Waltz starter step?
Is there a Waltz starter step? Of course there is. So the starter step in West Coast Swing, right? We're gonna go triple step, and then we're gonna use the anchor to establish a way connection, right? Because we're gonna do that at the end of every pattern. Because in West Coast Swing, we're looking for that away extension connection. So we use the starter step, the triple, into an anchor to establish that regardless of how I use my anchor. I'm using those 4 beats as a way to establish an away connection. So Waltz has the same thing, right? Waltz has swing and sway, and it actually is a dance that works from count 2 to count 2. So if you imagine a waltz, I start up at 2, and 3 and 1 are kind of working at the bottom, and 2 is back at the top. So the order is actually not 1, 2, 3, it's 3, 1, 2. So I started at 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So the 3 and the 1 go together. So a starter step in Waltz, if I were to be a leader, I would dance 4, 5, 6, and my first step 6 or 3, depends how you want to count Waltz. 4, 5, 6 would actually be my downswing. So I would begin the 1, 2, 3 naturally. So can I see you, Miss Megan? So if we took position, right, if we just moved from here, clunk 1, right, there's no energy to that. Because remember, I have to move from 2 to the 3. So if I did something like I swayed 1, 2, and we're at the top, 3, 1, 2, we would be able to have a start into that. So yes, Waltz does have a starter step. Thank you, dear. And much the same way as West Coast Swing, there are people who do it all sorts of ways. If you watch ballroom dance competitions, they will take position, they will set up their position, they will make sure the followers securely on their left side, they will dance onto their 3, and they will continue. So yes, it absolutely does have a traditional setup with the purpose of establishing the core concepts of the dance.
Those are the questions that we have.
That's short. Does anyone have anything to type in, or are we done early tonight? Let's do one question from each one of you, just for fun, and then we'll be done.
Huh?
One question.
Where'd you get your awesome shirt?
Where'd I get my awesome shirt? That is a great question. I'm glad you asked, Emily. In the description below on YouTube. So Miss Emily's curated a bunch of really cool West Coast Swing shirts. This one says Dance West Coast Swing. Megan has what I think is her signature shirt, which says Get Connected. Oh, she's going to bring it up. There's Got Connection with a question mark, like Got Milk.
There is a Dance Hair Don't Care. There is a Spin Junkie shirt that I just made yesterday. There's a 2-step shirt for, it says Master of the 2-Step.
Boom.
Boom. Yeah, there's tons. So there's generic ones. There's Live, Love, Dance. There's Dance is Better Than Therapy. There's West Coast Swing is Better Than Therapy. So go in there, check it out.
Bingo. So we got shirts. So if you want to support us, you can buy a shirt. You can become a member of the website. We had a couple questions today. We actually had one that someone called in, said, will we be doing more ballroom content? And yes, to a degree. The site, the membership side of the site will continue to grow out all the different dances. The next one on the list next week is Waltz. So we should have a big chunk of Waltz content in there. There's already West Coast Swing, 2-Step, Nightclub, Cha-Cha, and East Coast. Waltz is next up, so we will keep growing, maybe a little, who knows, maybe some country swing, maybe some hustle, who knows. We've got some really cool resources coming out here soon, some music resources. A lot of people asked about different, what songs do I dance West Coast Swing to? I know you guys have been around for a long time, don't have that trouble, but when you're new, it's a struggle to know what's a good East Coast song, or what's a good cha-cha song, or what's a good nightclub, or is that a waltz? So Miss Emily's been working on some free resources for you guys that we are ready to launch, hopefully in the next week or 2. Any other questions? I see them looking curiously at the computer. So yeah, we got plenty of good resources. Of course, we'll be back to work live video-wise. We will kind of be off our live video schedule, so we'll be back in the studio next week. I would like to continue this in some sort of format. I'm not sure how the live videos will be done. I did the math. You know what's crazy? We've put in almost 800 man hours into these live videos because it takes 4 of us a good couple hours in here to do just one set of 2 30-minute videos, plus the planning and prep. So we probably have 800 hours since the lockdown. Is that a mind-boggling stat? That's crazy. What do you got? Question?
There was a request.
Yes. So going back to our video that we did before, the dips and tricks.
Yep.
Can we show the swing through monkey bar rather than the walk under monkey bar version that we showed? So it's a different version of the monkey bar.
I have an interesting way to talk about this. Yeah. So I think that the general action, the swing through action, right, is a little bit, I'm going to turn around, is a little bit like this action here, right? The ragdoll dip. But it's happening, right? It's happening where, I'm going to go actually sideways this way, right? It's happening, so in this position, so Megan is going back and underneath the dip, right? So the way that Emily does it, and I typed this in the comments, is for sure the safer option, right? Because at this position, if you start to swing, there's all sorts of things that can happen when Megan swings, right? She can run into me, right? She can drop her hips too much, right? Drop to the ground. So the concept of being connected back, and then for sure that left foot for her has to start to go. Then is she going to go under the arm, whoop, and back and underneath is the question. I think functionally within the feet it's the same. I think the lead is even the same. It's really just a choice of the follower where you choose to put your body. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, when I go through this monkey bar, if I am going through hips first, make sure you're still over your feet, like Emily said earlier. As you go through, don't take your head super far back. Make sure it's still over your base, and you will be fine.
Bingo. Do you have any thoughts on that, since you guys are back there? Do you have any thoughts on the like a kind of a swing through?
No, it's just that way is much harder. So that's totally up to the follower and their athletic capabilities.
Boom.
And also Ben has a addition.
It's up to the follow and their athletic abilities, not their ability to hold on to their leader.
Yes.
Yeah. So on that, like kind of our general way of teaching all this, and I typed this in the comments too. That's exactly what you said. We kind of teach stuff in a fundamental way, right? There's definitely way more athletic ways to do this. In fact, a lot of the stuff we break down, we're trying to take the move that is being displayed with a ton of athletic ability and a ton of talent and a ton of practice and years of dancing, and doing it in a way that you should be able to teach just about anyone, right? So especially in the way that Emily and Ben did this, right? The connection back, that's a good fundamental connection, right? We're connected away. Then the follower has to get underneath the arm. The leader's sending them underneath there. Megan's ducking with her head a little bit first. She's very secure. In fact, there was one clip when you guys were teaching that Emily was just kind of not even hanging on Ben's arm, but connected and swaying within her own
squat base.
Yeah, within her own feet. So you could really, it's funny, we took 30 minutes to cover these 5 things. I feel like we could do it for 2 hours because there's a bunch of stuff you could break down about specifically where the follower is on her feet and controlling that, and where the leader is and how and the choices they come underneath. What ends up happening at a workshop is you go to a cool kid workshop, pro level person, they're doing what they do, right? And in a lot of cases, especially, and you'll agree with this too, in workshops around the country, when you're dealing with a lot of the traveling pros, the high level people, they are typically only teaching people at dance events, right? Generally higher level people. And I've been one of those people, they don't have the connection to what's it look like. How do we teach someone who's coming in for 6 lessons on their wedding and they have to do a lift because they want to look cool, and they got 6 weeks and they're not practicing and they know no dance history. So what's the most fundamental way you could teach that, which the pros are using as fundamentals as well, but they become slightly disconnected from that. So we tend to teach things in the more fundamental way, figuring that the people that are already on YouTube with 200,000 views, they got it. They don't need the lesson.
Well, and in a move like this too, as you could tell, going under head first for me, not really a good option because I have back issues. So I mean, you might have body issues to where it's easier for you to go backwards than forwards.
The other thing that I would suggest is not necessarily thinking of it as a back thing, but thinking of it as a lowering in your legs.
Boom. And I can say that from my perspective as a leader. One of the things that turned me off to a little bit of social dancing was as this type of stuff became more prominent, right? You'd see cool people doing these types of things and they'd be dropping and that type of stuff. And people would in that position, right, like just drop their hips and drop their weight on me, and there'd be like a moment. I have a bad back, so that moment was not great for people. It's common, it's super common, you see it all the time, but there's a distinct difference between the high level athletic ability and technical ability doing it correctly and the version that you see the masses do.
There's also a difference socially in making sure that you only do it if your leader leads you in it.
Yeah, this position all the time. This became so de facto standard that people, anytime you did this type of action, right, I didn't lead a darn thing, right? This is the lead into it. But what would happen is we get right here every single time, right? I do this and I'd go like, holy shit, like here we go, because she's on her way. And usually before I even got there. Any other questions? Couple. Oh,
All right, a couple of new questions. Who do you consider to be at the forefront of West Coast swing, the next generation of dancers?
Who do I consider at the forefront of West Coast swing, the next generation? That's a funny question. It's an interesting question. Obviously, Jordan and Tatiana are the gold standard. Benji is the gold standard. There's some amazing, Victoria Hank. Who else do we like?
I'm sorry?
Who else do I really like? I can't remember.
Sorry, I'm muted. As far as the next generation goes,
Yeah.
Victoria Hink is definitely one of them. Nicole Clonch is Benji's old partner, who is now dancing with
Tybalt. Is that his name? Tybalt?
Tybalt, yes.
Yeah.
They won Showcase this past year.
I think the big change, I had a couple, Emily, I can't remember her last name, from France, a couple of years ago, long, lanky couple, moved super good, and I remember watching them for the first time they did a routine, I was like, holy cow, I ran to my friends, I was like, no one's paying attention, but this is the future. That very like supple movement, but I think the biggest thing that's happening is you're seeing a higher level of athlete involved in West Coast swing. When you look at someone like a Benji Schwimmer, he's a high level athlete, right? His athletic abilities, his flexibility, his speed, his natural attributes, the fact that he's been dancing his whole life layered on to those attributes creates something pretty amazing. And I think you're seeing for sure a higher level of athlete today in West Coast swing than you ever did. People bringing in dance backgrounds, different dance backgrounds, and I don't even think it's necessarily the dance background per se. I think it's just the athletic ability, the range of motion, the speed. I think that's the biggest influence. And there's a bunch of people who's going to break through, quite frankly, the most obsessed person, because there are some super talented people that could be quote unquote champions that just don't push quite as much. So I think the people that are going to be the big changers in it over the next decade are going to be those super athletic people who are obsessed over a 10 or 15 year period. And I think that's something that's often lost when we look at the Jordan and Tatianas and the Benjis and those types of people, is the amount of time that they just kept showing up, that they just kept performing, that they just kept competing. And when you add all that up over 10, 15, and 20 years, that's when you get game-changing type people. But I don't know who the next game changer is, because it's going to take 10 years to show up.
Did you mention Jake
Jake Hanning?
and Mackenzie?
It did not. Oh, you're going to make me talk about them, right? So I'm going to do a little shout out, and I'm going to say it in my way. No one wants to be Jake Hanning, and everyone should be Jake Hanning. So Jake and Mackenzie, they were second this year at the US Open. The year before they were third, and the year before that they were at the bottom of the barrel. And there's not a lot of people that necessarily want to be Jake Hanning. I'm like you guys, I'm around, I hear what people are talking. We all want to be Benji and Jordan, we want to look super cool, we want to have Kyle's footwork, we want to be those types of people. I think Jake and Mackenzie are a great example of someone to emulate, because what they're doing is fundamental solid, and I think it could be achieved by a wider range of people. Now, will that make them the game changer of the decade? Likely not, but most of us, in fact, none of us will ever be that person, right? There's only one in a lifetime type of people when you come to the Jordan and Tatianas and the Benjis. But if you're trying to become a super high level proficient dancer, I think Jake and Mackenzie are a good example. I had a conversation with Jake. I said, Jake, he's very self-deprecating. I said, what's your secret? You finished second at the US Open. Most people cut their toe off to get from novice to intermediate. What's your secret? And he looked, well, he didn't look at me, I was on the phone. And he goes, I practice, and then I look at the video, and I fix what looks bad, and then I practice. So there you go.
There you go. Perfect. Leo asks, were you guys able to look at the triple travel with roll move that he shared with us last week? Interested to see how you incorporate it into your videos, and apparently Megan knows what that means.
Triple travel, the roll move.
Leo, I emailed you back about this, and what I had said about it is it feels like a cha-cha move to me, and I haven't seen it in West Coast Swing, but I'll kind of show Brian the gist of it. I don't know how you got into it, but it had something to do with a turn, and then we cha-cha'd, and then we turned.
Oh, East
I
Coast
don't know
Swing.
if you're still...
East Coast
This
Swing.
is for West Coast Swing.
Oh,
Thoughts?
yeah, so I guess like this type of thing, yeah, it's kind of based off of an East Coast Swing pattern. So I guess it could be adopted for West Coast Swing. Notice how we tripled and bounced?
Yeah, I know, I couldn't help it.
Hearing for stuff at the end, it can be West
Yeah.
Coast.
Yeah, so I don't know of a direct application. I don't think I've seen it directly, but one of the things I think is neat is you'll see people have dance backgrounds in a particular area, and they'll just blend those things in. And sometimes we all get arrogant because we're like, that's not West Coast Swing. Well, all the swings used to be much more similar than different, and they've branched apart. And like my discussion with Forrest Outman, the dance historian, I said, what can the old school learn from the new school, or what can the new school learn from the old school? And he said to find some of its old tricks. So maybe this is a pattern that existed back in the day that you could use.
Sorry, we don't have
Anchor,
very-
step, and
very
walk,
far to
too.
go.
So I'm sorry I don't have a more detailed answer. That one caught me by surprise. I'm glad you
Sorry,
had it.
I emailed you back. It wasn't a very good email back. I'm sorry. I've just never seen the move, so.
Bingo. Show us a video. We'll break it down. We'll make it a new move of the week.
He did send the video.
Oh, did it really?
Yeah.
That's cool. I'll have to see it. I didn't see it.
Next question. As a starting out dance instructor, a new dance instructor, how do you build your business?
How do you build your business as a new dance instructor? The thing that comes to the top of my head is serve people. So serve people, be excited, and be a leader. And do not expect it to happen quickly. I think a lot of us are sucked in by this. You know, we tend to get inspired by Jordan and Tatiana. So we want to become that, right? No one's inspired by the terrible person who's new. We're inspired by the good people. But it's a long path to get to that. So I would, if I was just starting, depends on the situation, but I would be trying to hold a class and hustling any of my friends and any of the local community to come. And I would expect that no one showed up, but I would expect I would be doing that every Tuesday at 7 o'clock until someone did show up, until there was 2 people, and then 4 people, and then back to 1 person, and then 12 people, and then 20 people, and you think you're doing great, and then the next week 3 people show up. I think that's the path. And I've been all around the world dancing, 20-something countries, and in every single dance community that I've been to, and this spans swing and country and ballroom and line dancing and everything in between, there was a super excited hustler that was showing up with a boombox when no one thought it was cool. And if you are that person, I think that's the start. I would be very honest about your abilities in 2 ways. Number 1, I would not sell yourself short, right? If you've learned something, you definitely have something to give to someone else. And then on the flip side, I would be confident in the abilities that you know, and then be clear to the people and say, hey, look, I'm really good at getting you to this point. And what will happen is you will grow with your first set of students. And Megan's heard me say this a bunch. Like, she and I danced together 15 years before we danced professionally-ish or so. And I had a couple of students that I taught for over a decade as private lesson teachers, and they were really good. They were really good, talented dancers, and I grew as a teacher with them. I obviously was good enough to be their teacher at the beginning, but I got much better in taking them through the journey, and I was always honest in telling them what I was good at and what I wasn't good at, and I kind of stayed as the head coach and was their teacher because I was good enough to start the process, but then smart enough to, and honest enough to let them know what I wasn't good at as we're going along, and we grew together. So I think that's probably the path, to stay out of the weeds of like technically how do you market and all that stuff. Which, if that's a question, you can ask that too. Are we good? Good deal, gang. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We'll be back tomorrow for Beginner Intermediate Hustle, and then the group Q&A where we just sit around and.
No, there's a theme.
There's a theme. What's the theme to the Q&A tomorrow?
How good West Coast swing dancers become great.
Q&A based around how good West Coast swing dancers become great. A lot of hard work. Like these videos.
Tune in, because there's more to it.
800 man hours, and if you watch the first 3 of them, they were disgustingly terrible. So these videos alone are a good example of how otherwise reasonably intelligent people stunk at the beginning, worked hard at it, figured it out, and went down a journey. So we've learned a lot about these live videos. I've learned a lot about the online learning format in a live video. It's very